Yes, Ted?
Just a comment. I mean, one of the things where I've seen more innovation is when universities use applied research versus basic research. Because when you use applied research, there's a tendency to understand the commercialization value of the product or process prototype. When you do basic research, I mean, North America is full of universities who do basic research, develop a great idea, but there's no commercial value. So there's a practicalness to, in my mind, applied research. There's an academic focus to basic research. There's got to be a balance, but where commercialization happens tends to be on the applied research, and it's not because basic research was done necessarily. It's because there was a collaboration between industry, a food processor, and the university.
Thank you, Ted. I think it's a really good comment, and it's also helping me build to what I'm going to speak about. I'm going to highlight the big differences, or no, not differences, between the two regions, and I'm going to let the rest of the speakers talk about Food Valley and also speak about what you just mentioned, which is the basic research and the applied research, and how do they deal with that? Because Dr. Hill just also mentioned, well, if we don't get funding, then basic research is going to be out of the structure in a few years, and that we don't want that either. So in terms of the differences that we found, and why is it that Food Valley is really known as an innovative cluster, and then we aren't? So going back to the survey, the first topic was around the definition of innovation, and it's very clear that there is no consensus in Ontario. There is the whole range from I'm not an innovator, and when we delved into what they do, they were innovators. They were innovative, but they didn't know that they actually were, to the other extreme where companies would say, we are innovative, and really what we're doing is they're doing line extensions, so adding a new flavor or a new color to their already existing line of products. So that's really not what we were talking about in terms of innovation. There is a definition that somebody gave us, which is innovation is a design that alleviates a problem or helps with efficiency. It really depends on what the specific example is. So it's a very vague definition of innovation. And I think that is a gap. If you go to Food Valley, even though there are different definitions, they are all really pointing in the same direction. It's really something new that adds value to somebody at the end of the process. So it is commercialized, and it is successfully commercialized for a period of time. It's not just an invention. It's not just an idea. And it's not just brought to market to test it, but it is successful in the market for some time. So there was consensus on that, and I think that is a gap. As a result of not having a clear definition of innovation locally, well then, there aren't formal innovation strategies in place. There were very few companies that have an innovation strategy, and but most of them don't have one. And you don't need an R&D department to have an innovation strategy. It's very clear. You can be a 10-people company and still be very innovative and have a strategy and not have an R&D program in place. So not having an innovation strategy is definitely not common locally. So that is a gap. We're not focused on innovation. What is not a difference? The drivers for innovation, both here and there, are competitiveness and generating more profit, and that seemed to be the general trend in both regions. So that's really not a gap. But when you think about what are the other drivers of innovation, there was only one company in Ontario that mentioned that it was part of their business culture, that it was part of what they do on their day-to-day work. So. Innovation not being part of their business culture, innovation not being associated with having the right people in the company, that seems to be a really strong gap, where whereas in Food Valley, it is clear that innovation is associated directly with the people involved in the company. It's the people that are really driving the innovation, not necessarily the resources. Barriers, and this is to touch on Steve's question. Everybody said regulations is a barrier, here and there. They said the same thing. They said regulations are, what was it, years behind technology. So why are we different? We have the same issues with regulations. So they're not the gap. They are not making the difference. Access to funding, that was also mentioned in both regions. Everybody would like to have more money. So is that making the difference? Well, I don't think so. What is a barrier? This is an example of several, it's a quotation from several companies actually in the Netherlands. They said the customer is not ready. In other words, our technology is really advanced and we can make lots of different products, but the customer is not ready to take them. They are way ahead of the customer. So they are not. So they see that as a barrier, because if the customer will not buy their product, then they won't market it. I mean, so they see that as a big barrier. In terms of dedicated resources, we see this as a big gap as well. Not having innovation as part of their structure or of their strategic planning. Dedicated resources in Ontario are really minimal to none. There are a few companies that do dedicate some resources, especially the large ones. The medium-sized and smaller companies don't dedicate any resources to innovation. So of course, if there are no resources dedicated to it, then innovation doesn't happen naturally. In Food Valley, everybody, from the very small company to the large one, everybody dedicates at least some HR dollars, technical and strategic resources to innovation. So that is a big gap. Again, innovation is not part of the business culture here, so it's not on the strategic plan. It's not on the planning for the year. In terms of required resources, in Ontario, everybody said we need dollars, of course. We need technical resources. We need training resources and marketing, I was surprised to see that. We need resources for marketing. What was the big resource required and mentioned by Food Valley processors and providers? Networking resources. That is something that didn't even come up in Ontario. Networking as a driver for collaboration, as a driver for establishing strategic partnerships, that wasn't even mentioned here. Networking is really high on the list in Food Valley. And of course, they also mentioned we also need more dollars and we need more technical resources, of course. But the big one is networking. That is a big gap. Again, in terms of required resources, in terms of service providers, you'll see what you've got in your packages. We got a list of about 30 service providers dedicated exclusively to the food processing industry on innovation. But this is across Canada that we were able to find. So from BC to the East Coast. In Food Valley, there are about 34 members of Food Valley alone. So there's a huge difference. There's a lot more technical resources. And this includes both public and private service providers. In terms of collaboration, well, you've heard about the response rates. And I've known Joep Koenen for a couple of years now. I've seen how he moves around in Wageningen. Everybody knows him. He's very influential. So the fact that he made the call to the companies, of course, yeah, they got 100% response. But is it really just that? I don't think so. We're not as influential as you, but we also contacted only those companies that we thought we were going to get a positive response from. We didn't fire out an email to 3,000 processors. We didn't get the response rate that we wanted. In fact, we got some very negative responses that they were not willing to share information with us. Collaboration, again, the question on open to collaboration, whether they were open or not to collaboration. In Ontario, 19% of the respondents said no. And I know it's a small sample size, but the fact that we got no's, that's what's really what makes a big difference to me. 19% said no, 22% said yes, but, and it really sounded more like a no than yes. So that's almost half of the respondents. So I think that is a big difference. In Food Valley, all of them said yes, as Ivana mentioned. Some of them replied back like, what do you mean? Are you serious? Of course we're open to collaboration. Whereas, we got some no's. Only some of the companies here mentioned any benefits from being associated with industry groups. They didn't mention benefiting from networking opportunities or anything of that sort. In Food Valley, they also said Food Valley didn't really play a direct role in our innovation process. But they did say that Food Valley provides an excellent opportunity for networking and establishing those strategic partnerships, and of course it is a marketing platform as well. What we think is a big finding is that it seems like innovation or the big gaps are really directly associated with people, with the people in the company or the people in our industry. And the fact that people may say, I'm not an innovator, or business culture is not a driver, that leads to fewer or less resources dedicated to innovation. So that creates a cycle so less resources, less innovation, less activity, and the fact that collaboration and networking wasn't mentioned here, I think that is a big gap. Again, very directly associated with people. So this has already been brought up a little bit. So what is innovation dependent on? Is it really associated with people? Is it an attitude? Is it a mindset? It really seems like it is a state of mind. So then what is the role of resources? How do we get this going? And I think that, of course, we need some seed resources. There needs to be some funding programs, something to get the process started. But if we get this started, and if industry starts looking for the other resources, which would be the technical and the human resources, then they will definitely come. If we just put in the seed resources, we can start the process going, and the demand for technical resources will generate more service providers in that area. To wrap up the study, in terms of recommendations, I believe that we do have the elements here. We have almost everything we need to get going, but we need to create that environment for collaboration. So for industry, our recommendations would be encourage collaboration within your companies, within the different sectors of industry, in the food processing industry. Use your associations. Members should use their associations as vehicles to develop those networking opportunities, so that they can start learning about what each other is doing and taking advantage of those opportunities. There is an Ontario Food Cluster that was formally created recently in the last couple of years. I don't know how many people know about this. It is an organization that can definitely help industry, and I would say I would ask industry not just to get involved, but to actually lead that cluster. Come on, bring your expectations and your needs to the cluster and get it going. Industry is not really involved in the cluster right now, so get that interaction going. In terms of government, of course, government needs to support the clusters, the associations. They need to have funding programs. The one big thing here is those funding programs need to be longer term. They need to be more permanent. Like, they can't be a 2-year program, a 3-year program where industry doesn't have the chance to prepare with a project and complete it within that short window of time. And of course, one other point is these funding programs don't need to be exclusively directed to innovation projects. If government can fund projects that will help smaller businesses grow or increase their productivity, that will lead innovation. So it doesn't have to be, directly innovation-related funding. If we can encourage growth and productivity, we will encourage innovation. In terms of academia and service providers, we just mentioned this a few minutes ago, the fact that a lot of research is done at the university level, and what has happened in the past commonly is that research is generated and then it's pushed into the industry with little return. A movement towards a pull, so drawing industry to research and drawing industry to service providers seems to be a lot more effective. Strengthen commercialization. So take it from the bench all the way to the market successfully. I think that is a good thing that service providers and academia should be looking for. And more importantly, collaboration. Again, not everybody's got all the resources. Somebody's got a little piece here and there. Look for strategic partnerships. That will make the system a lot stronger, and by finding the synergies, of course, we can deliver a lot better services to the industry. So those are the big highlights of the study. The final report will be available about mid-January. It'll be posted on our website, so if anybody has any questions or wants to access it, it'll be available. Are there any questions?
Yes, Brett? Have you any plans to redo that study in 3 years, 5 years, to see how we're improving?
It would be a really nice follow-up, definitely. It is not on the plan now, but it would make sense to follow up with a similar study if something has been implemented in the way. Like we need to have a plan first, and the plan needs to come from all sectors, so government, industry, and academia. It can't be just industry, it can't just be the food cluster, it has to be everybody that is involved. Johanna?
It's been very interesting, the information that's come forth this morning, both from the Netherlands and from Canada. But we as a nation have difficulties in engaging in networking and collaboration because of demographics and geography. And also with respect to the support that the Netherlands government has provided to the Wageningen University and the industry and sort of the stakeholders over there. Do you see sort of a big plan for Canada that could bring our country to where the Netherlands is and the Food Valley is for us?
Okay, that's a really good question. Johanna's asking, she's saying or commenting on the fact that Canada is so much larger than the Netherlands, so it's a lot more difficult to network. She also mentioned the fact that the Dutch government has provided a lot more funding, apparently, to Food Valley. So the question was, do I see a plan for bringing the nation together, basically? Well, no, I don't see that. I haven't seen the plan. It would be great to have that plan in place. And again, it needs the collaboration of everybody. It can't be just government saying, here's the money, do this. It can't be just industry asking for money. It has to be a collaborative approach. And I'm not seeing any indication of that. But at the same time, there is a lot of interest in innovation in the food processing industry from all levels of government. So maybe we can start driving the policies in that direction.
Yes.
I just want to point out that right now we're sitting in the middle of the second largest food processing cluster in North America. I don't think the size of Canada is the issue. No. We've got a very large food industry right here. And the total NSP is what, 36 billion, something of that sort. So I mean, we can do things locally.
Okay, so I think you touched on a really good point. Yeah, as I just mentioned, the issue is not really the funding. The issue is the state of mind and the attitude. That's really the issue. Johanna is asking because she's representing an organization that works for the entire country, And it would be really nice to have an approach to change that attitude and that state of mind across the country. That would be perfect. John?
It's been tried before with Nutrinet Canada, and that failed because it was under-resourced. And I think a better approach is to take look at a very regional approach to that clustered innovation production. So Ontario, for example, should have its own regional entity. If you want to do a national entity, you link each of these ones that way. But take advantage of the strengths that you have here first.
Thank you, John. Mike?
So in both studies, it wasn't mentioned at all in terms of, you're talking about innovation, but you're innovating for something, right? You're innovating for the food service industry, the retail industry. Where does that come in to this? It was, the consumers were mentioned, but the consumers, there's a level between the processors and the consumers that drives innovation. If the retailers aren't asking for it, if the food service suppliers aren't asking for innovative products,
Yeah, that's a really
how do you
good.
do that?
That's a good question. Michael is asking about the role of the consumers in the process and why they weren't really mentioned here. Only in some companies in Ontario that have a good understanding of innovation was there a mention of consumers and how the market would drive their innovation. In many others, it's not part of the game, unfortunately. So they are probably creating new products, new processes that are not going to be successful because the consumer was not integrated into the process. So they were not. And what I can say for Food Valley is that since they do understand that innovation means all the way to a successful product in the marketplace, consumers have been involved in the process from the very beginning. So it wasn't even mentioned because that's an assumption that it's already, that consumers are they are driving innovation. And that's one of the barriers that was mentioned. The consumer is not ready. So the consumer is not asking because they don't know that this technology is available. So they saw that as a barrier. Ted?
I think you really have to understand what the consumer wants. I mean, you have to have somehow done research, understand what they want. And the classic example is the comment about the processors were saying that the customer's not ready. And a classic example is, I'll say 15 years ago, gluten-free products went out there, and what you'll get from those manufacturers who make gluten-free, will say, well, the customer's not ready. The problem was they didn't understand that somebody who wants gluten-free also wants it to taste good. Now, gluten-free, I sold a pizza company that has gluten-free pizza, and it's equally as good as regular pizza. And the key is the consumer always said, I want, if you've got wheat sensitivity, I want gluten-free. So the manufacturer or processor doesn't understand the consumer will say, well, I'll give them gluten-free, it doesn't taste that good, but they'll put up. That's not the way the consumer works. They won't give up on taste for the gluten-free. And that, again, that's classic. That's how all the gluten-free in my mind is evolved, and that's why it's growing.
Yeah, great comment. We've got time for, two more comments. Paulus?
Comment, you mentioned trade associations as a way to gather companies. But what I feel is that the advantage of Food Valley is that you're not only talking with your own breed. Because when you're talking in a trade association, you're basically all competition. So it's much more difficult to be open to your direct competition than to talk with companies, other food companies, and to build alliances with those other food companies. So I think trade associations is, for innovation, not a very good platform. You should have something which is over the industry, and not only the trade association.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that comment. I think that breaking down the silos of different organizations and groups that are competing for government funding, working more collaboratively together at that level will help tremendously. The second point I wanted to make is the definition of innovation. Will that be talked about more later on?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I have asked specifically our next speaker, the next one, to talk about innovation and how they define it. Yes, there will be a lot more discussion on that. Well, thank you very much. We're ready for a coffee break, and we should be back at a 1:45, please, because we're running a little bit behind.